Any other questions from the panel? All right, well, that done, we want to thank our panel for their efforts tonight. We want to move on to our final statements from our candidates. We have asked the candidates to, in a brief 3 minutes, explain to us their opinions and why they think or they would be the best candidate for the job. And so since Mr. Jordan started off this evening, Mr. Kissick will begin.
Well, last year, in a span of several months, I went from fed-up voter to Tea Party activist to registered Libertarian to candidate for office. And when a year and a half ago, if someone had told me this is where I'd be seated right now, I would have laughed. I would have never dreamed that I'd be in this position. But it's been an honor to seek representation of the 4th District of Ohio. And my choice to become a candidate is based on 3 goals. The first and obvious one is I want to win. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't feel that I had a legitimate shot. But to do that, I'm going to have to achieve 2 other goals. One of the most important ones will be to try and dispel a lot of the misconceptions that exist about what the Libertarian Party is about and what it means to be a Libertarian. And in addition, the next goal is to convince the voters, really, that we have to get past these preconceived notions that in order to hold an elected office, you either have to have the right education, you have to come from the right profession, and you have to have the right connections. If we can get past that, because a lot of the rhetoric has been over the last year, we need to stop focusing on whether it's an R or a D that follows our name, or an L. But we have to start considering that sometimes the average person out there, someone who's walked a mile in your shoes, they may have the answer, or they may have that problem-solving skill that hasn't existed before. Both houses of Congress, you've got 535 members, 535 people who have called themselves experts on the situation, and they've run us up into record debt, record deficits, and record-breaking power grabs in Washington. It's time we got back to a Congress that respects the 10th Amendment, that understands that laws must meet the criteria of Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution, that Congress has certain enumerated powers that we must not exceed. That is when the problems begin, and that is the attitude that I want to bring with me to Washington. I want you to send me there so I can make Washington less relevant in our everyday lives. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. Thank the panel and everyone for putting the event together tonight. Look, I never intended to get involved in politics. I was going to be a wrestling coach. I was going to help student athletes get to their goals and their dreams on the wrestling mat, and was doing that. And then when you get married and you have children, you suddenly look at the world a little different. And you get tired of government taking your money and telling you what to do. And I decided to run for office because I thought I could make a difference for the families I had the privilege of representing. And I have a simple formula, and it's been part of how I go about my job from the time I got involved in political life. And that is doing things that I think will benefit families, that will benefit the key institution in our culture that I believe ultimately determines the strength of our entire society. And that's what I've set about doing as your member of Congress. That's what I want to continue to do. And I really think there are 4 basic things we have to focus on as a member of Congress. Making sure we have strong national defense to protect us in this dangerous terrorist-filled world. Making sure we cut spending so that we don't saddle our kids and our grandkids with an unbelievable amount of debt, numbers we can't even fathom, that are going to be there for them to pay back. It is immoral for one generation to say the next, we're going to live for the moment and we're going to send the bill to you. It is just plain wrong. And I'm, as I've said earlier, the only member of Congress to introduce a budget that actually gets to balance. We should reduce taxes so that we can foster the growth we need to ultimately deal with our budget and our deficit problems. And then finally, we should not be afraid. We should never shy away from defending traditional values. The values, the principles that make us the greatest nation in the world in the first place. And they're not just always the ones you hear about in an election in a political context. It's not just about respect for the sanctity of life and for family and for marriage. It's about respect for the free market, respect for the work ethic, respect for those principles that made us the great country that we are. And then I would just say this, the biggest problem in Washington is there aren't enough people willing to make the tough decisions. I had I had a coach in high school. He passed away a year ago. Amazing. He taught chemistry and physics in our school. Toughest teacher in our school. Toughest wrestling coach in the state. Every single day, and this is no exaggeration, every day he talked about discipline. He said, Jordan, you want to do well in my class? This is physics. This is chemistry. You got to have some discipline. You got to prepare. You got to work. You want to do well in the rest of it. You got to have self-discipline. Self-discipline. There were days I was like, I wish this guy would be quiet. He's driving me crazy. But he had a great definition. He said, discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. And basically that meant doing things his way when you'd rather do them your way. It's funny how teachers and coaches are like that. It meant doing things the right way when you'd rather do them the convenient way. The problem in Washington is we've for far too long had politicians who did things the convenient way instead of doing them the right way. We're at a point in our nation's history, if we're going to get this ship turned around and head in the right direction so that we can continue to be the greatest country in the world, we need people with the discipline to make the tough calls, to balance a budget, to reduce the tax burden, and not do what politicians love to do, spend other people's money. That's why I want to go back and represent your family and your small business in Washington and continue to fight for those values that make us a great country.
All right, we want to thank both our candidates for this evening. Can we give a round of applause for our candidates for participating? We also want to thank our sponsors, AEP Ohio, CenturyLink, Superior Federal Credit Union, Time Warner Cable, and of course Ohio State University Lima for allowing us in this beautiful theater. We want to remind you that GTV2 will be airing tonight's Candidates Forum beginning tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock and will air it 7 days at 3 and 5:30 p.m. You can also see it at limaohio.com on the web. So thank you all for coming out tonight. Have a great evening.